Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer, and my guest this week is my old friend Eric Eisen. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you.
Eric and I have kind of known each other, first at least saw each other in the summer of 1970 in Poland Spring, Maine, at a course that Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was conducting. And Eric was a filmmaker at that time, and he was shooting a documentary called The Main Purpose. Maharishi liked puns. And, he went on to become a filmmaker in the TM movement, and Eric and I taught together on all sorts of projects and teaching teams in various places, Detroit, Chicago, Boston, and on various overseas adventures. So these days Eric is a oneness meditation or oneness teacher. He'll explain the details, but I just wanted to give you a real quick overview of our connection, and then we will retrace our steps and go into lots of details. And I think you're going to find this interesting, because Eric is an interesting guy. So, I saw you give a presentation the other night, and you briefly recapped your spiritual odyssey back to the days of when you were a Harvard student, and you first saw a poster of Maharishi up on some campus building. So let's take it from there and then see where we go.
All right. Life story in a capsule here. I was a Harvard student, undergraduate, and had just been becoming interested in conversations with people about God and spirituality, and was just starting to have some interest. I really hadn't pursued it in any direction, but I felt drawn to it. And I saw a poster with this Indian master who was coming to speak at Harvard, and I thought, well, that's cool, let's go check this out. So I went to hear him, and I kind of, the minute he walked through the door, I kind of fell in love with him. You know, I just remember when he walked through the door, my mind just kept going over and over and over. That's the real thing. That's the real thing. And I could just sort of feel this very powerful energy of his consciousness and awareness. And he gave a great talk, which was centered all about his transcendental meditation technique. And so I learned the technique, and just from the day of my initiation, I started having really wonderful experiences, inner experiences. I'm kind of visual, so a lot of visual. I would see things, and they're more than visual. They always had certain energy or feeling to them, which gave them a reality more than just a cartoon or a dream.
Like what, for example?
Well, I remember one time I was meditating, and my mantra took the form of a goddess, which is what the TM mantras are. I know I'm not supposed to say that, but that's, okay. That's what they are. No, but well,
yeah, they're bija mantras.
They're bija mantras of the Divine Mothers. Bija means seed mantras, and she was taking me by the hand and walking me through these beautiful grassy meadows and plains and forests and things like that, and I could feel myself being there as well as just seeing it. It was like that, and I felt this very, very powerful, blissful energy. You know, it's hard to put these things in concepts because they're experiences, so they die when you put them in words. But I hope many of you know what I mean, that there's a differentiation between like a fantasy and a real spiritual experience. The real spiritual experience is just, you know it when it's true because of the energy and the joy that's associated with it. So I felt all that, and interestingly, that it turned out to be kind of the story of my life. You know, I stayed in the TM movement for almost 40 years after that, and spent almost 10 years in Switzerland, where I had many a walk and beautiful grass-covered Swiss meadows and with wildflowers and beautiful trees. Spent a year teaching TM in Sri Lanka and the beautiful hill country where the tea plantations grow. Just many adventures. Of course, there was also the slums of Detroit and a couple of years in downtown Chicago. So it was mixed. Yeah. So there were there were many adventures, but you know, it was sort of like a prediction of what was going to come. So that's just one example. And I remember when I was initiated in TM, I saw visually, and it was an experience at the same time I was seeing it, that my whole life I'd been as if trapped in the surface tension of the ocean, trapped on the surface of the water. And all of a sudden, with the initiation, as soon as I started the mantra, I could see the surface tension break, and I settled down deep into the ocean. And you know, just those kinds of things. And there were many other sort of peak experiences along the way. I think one of the most important things in my life, I was on a long meditation course. Well, I'll back up a little bit. So, as a filmmaker, I used to travel with Maharishi. And on my first trip to India, I was sent ahead of Maharishi early to deliver some materials for a conference that was going on, and then I was going to meet him to do my filming. And so since I was like 2 weeks early, I went up to Maharishi's ashram in Rishikesh to spend the extra time. And when I was up there, lost my train of thought.
Well, you got there 2 weeks early because you had to deliver some materials, and you went up to Rishikesh to bide time until Maharishi came.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the experience was I was leading up to. Okay, I do remember now. Okay, I remember. It wasn't so much an experience. So I was walking on the banks of the Ganges in Rishikesh, and I came to a bookstall for the Gita Press, which I knew was like a spiritual book publishing company. And I was looking at the different books, and at that time I was pretty green. I hadn't had a lot of education in the Vedic tradition. This was 1974, and I'd been with Maharishi a few years, but you know, I just didn't know that much about the Vedic literature and the names of different things. So I was looking at the books and didn't really know what to get or what would be interesting. And the bookseller, you know, it was just, you know, you're in Rishikesh, the atmosphere there is so profound. And you know, he just had this intuition. He picked up these big 3-volume books of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and he hands it to me and says, "This is for you, sir." You know, so, you know, and he was right. It was. You know, I read those books, and I became. It gave me a whole deeper level of understanding of everything Maharishi had been teaching and saying. I somehow saw the truth behind what he was saying. Maharishi was gearing his teaching towards Westerners very much and trying to keep it palatable to them, and he didn't want to sort of reveal the Vedic deeper roots and truths behind it. You know, he made us wear ties and suits and everything. We were like an elaborate masquerade, you know, masquerading that we weren't really a Vedic tradition, or, you know, or a Vedic cult. You know, so we were always trying to cover it up and pretend we were teaching, you know, relaxation techniques that would, you know, help you practically, which they would. You know, it's good for the mind, good for the body, good for everything, and very helpful in life. And I was experiencing a lot of growth in those years. But you know, reading the Bhagavatam was like a major turning point for me in the level of understanding I got of what was really in the teaching and what was really behind it. And secondly,
you got to tell us why that was so, right? I mean, what was it about the Bhagavatam that was such a big breakthrough for you?
Well, but that's basically it. I felt like, you know, I understood what Maharishi was saying. I wish I could remember specific teachings. Not a, you know, it'd be better to give a specific example. I mean, the
Srimad Bhagavatam is about Lord Krishna, isn't it?
The Srimad Bhagavatam is the story of the 10 incarnations of Vishnu. So there are 1 or 2 or 3 chapters about each of the incarnations. And so along the way, when they tell the stories, it brings out many of the truths of consciousness and the deeper levels of consciousness, levels of consciousness, the importance of connecting with the divine and expanding. And I felt like a lot of that was you know, behind the masquerade of the Western geared thinking and speaking that we had in the TM movement.
I see. So I mean, when we were talking about we were pretty much limiting our conversation to deep rest and scientific research and
That's right.
you know, simple analogies and so on.
Yeah.
And you kind of realized at that point when you read that book that there was this whole vast kind of cosmic wisdom behind the whole thing.
That's
It
right.
wasn't just a simple little technique.
That's right. Yeah, not just the technique, but you know, I'd been around Maharishi for almost 3 or 4 years at that point and heard many lectures. Maharishi, you know, one of the ways he blessed people was by talking. You know, he gave long lectures for hours on end, and you know, great knowledge, great teaching, and he, you know, I'd been hearing that, listening to it, and as a filmmaker, I'd been, you know, looking at it and listening to it over and over on my editing machines too. You know, where it kind of penetrated.
Yeah.
But you know, he was always talking. I wish I could remember specific examples, but you know, he'd be talking about unity consciousness and you know, cosmic consciousness, and he would be defining it. And there were many, you know, really good, juicy things he would say along the way, and I wasn't getting it fully until I read that book. Somehow it connected. You know, I kept reading the book and it was like, oh, that's what he's talking about.
Huh.
Oh, that's what he really means. That's what this is really all about. It was like that over and over and over again. So all I can remember is my reaction,
Yeah.
and I apologize to the viewers. I know it's much juicier to hear the specific examples, but I don't really remember them. I just remember the transition it gave to me. And then perhaps even more important, I just fell in love with Lord Krishna. You know, reading the stories about him, I just was so inspired, and I just thought, you know, this is incredible. And oh, hello, we have some howling visitors.
They're out of camera range, but hi guys.
Maybe we can hear
Okay,
you.
they just had their breakfast.
So we're being attacked by a vicious pack of hounds. So
Okay, you guys, go in the other room. Hey, okay, sit down.
yeah, very informal interview.
Yeah,
Very natural. We're natural.
it's usually this way. I'm letting dogs in and out all the time. Cats are jumping up. This is real life.
Yeah, real life. So anyway,
Hey, Irene. Okay,
oh, you're very
would you
loud.
please?
Hey, come on, get out of here, you two.
Okay, better close the door for a bit.
Yeah.
Or just, yeah, whatever.
So where we were, you know, about 2 years after I read those books, I was on a long meditation course, and one day I just went into this phenomenal bliss, and I found myself sitting at the feet of Lord Krishna in his heaven. He was on his throne. You know, there were all his buddies around him.
or
You know,
whatever,
and I'll never forget the scene. You know, everything was gold, shades of gold. You know, so even though I don't know how they do it, but you could still differentiate sort of shadow and degrees. But you know, the couch was gold, his whole body was gold, everything, his hair was gold, his crown was gold, everything, all the beings around him were gold, and he just sat and looked at me and was giving me like this really strong blessing through his eyes, and then the experience changed, and I started experiencing him inside my body, where he was like working on the different chakras, opening things up, blessing me, just making, you know, a lot of like surgeries and alterations on the energetic level or whatever. I have no idea what he was doing. You know? And it was kind of and after that my experiences really changed. You know, I sort of got this medical, I think he gave me a gift of a medical intuitive ability, which I've been able to use to earn a living most of my life. And it was a big transformation.
Now, some people who listen to that are going to think, whoa, that's really cool, far out. Others are going to think, it's just this imaginary, fanciful thing. All that really matters is non-duality. That which comes and goes isn't real. You know, only that which is perpetual is real.
Right.
And so, you know, this guy has a vivid imagination. You know, but there's nothing more to it than that.
Yeah.
So, what would you say to them?
Well, you know, physically my health changed, and I developed, you know, abilities and powers that I didn't have before. So
These-
something
the medical
real
intuitive
the
things.
medical intuitive ability. I could see inside the body
Yeah.
when I took a person's pulse when I learned Ayurveda.
We're going to have a demonstration of that in a while.
And and my whole experience has deepened. But your question has huge implications for I think the greater teaching of my life and the stories of my life, because I stayed in the TM movement for many years and had many of these wonderful experiences, and they were states. They weren't imagination. These realms live. You can go into the non-dual teaching and say there's nothing but non-duality, nothing but oneness, nothing but Brahman, nothing but the void, however, whatever you want to call it.
And ultimately, you're right.
And ultimately, that's true. But the fact is, you're in a body. You're here in a body. You have to deal with that. and the trees are out there. The dogs are here. The cats are there. The house is here. You got to fix your roof. You got to chop wood, carry water, as the Buddhist teacher said. So you're dealing with that relative reality at the same time you may know the truth. Now, what my experience was, and what ultimately caused me to leave the TM movement in the world, was that all these experiences were states. They came and they went. So I could be, and ultimately that gave me great suffering. After this glorious day with Lord Krishna, the next day I was back to being pretty much me. I had some more abilities, but I had my same faults, and they weren't leaving. And I really struggled with my faults, and was just told over and over, all you have to do is meditate and do your program every day, and you're going to become enlightened, and you're going to change and become this great person and glorious being, and all your dreams are going to come true. And it didn't happen for me, and I don't think there are many for whom it happened. I don't believe that a system can give it to you.
Well, I do know a number of people in the TM movement who...
You would know them more than I would.
Whom I would say have definitely undergone a shift. On a relative level, they may still have their faults. I think everyone does on a relative level, but there's been a shift, and pure consciousness, if we want to call it that, is perpetual. It's a solid foundation of their experience of their life, 24/7.
Yeah. So there are some, but it didn't work for me, and most of the people I was around as a monk in the Maharishi's Purusha group, it wasn't happening for them.
Right.
And most of the people I know in the movement here in Fairfield, in other words, it didn't happen for them.
Yeah.
And it's not, because I don't believe there is such a thing as one size fits all for anything. I think the minute you establish a system, you're going into a great limitation. I heard Maharishi say himself, my years around him, I had many phenomenal experiences. I have the greatest respect for him, but ultimately I had to go. Because,
what did he say?
Well, he said that everything was actually grace. So even though he was teaching us that the system will do it, that you meditate and it's a system, the mantra takes you to the transcendent, you're going to transcend, and you're going to become enlightened because you're going to dissolve all your stress. And he taught it all very systematically. But then he also said it was really all about grace. That ultimately it was your grace with the divine that would grant you awakening. There's nothing you could do that was actually going to do it. It wasn't what you were doing, you're meditating. It was a matter of exposing yourself to grace, of getting into the flow of the grace.
Let's dig into that a little bit.
Yeah.
To my mind, that applies on two levels, basically. One is the meditation process itself from day one is a matter of grace.
It is.
Because you're not doing it. You have the intention to sit down and practice, but the more you are actually interjecting some sort of doership into the practice, the less effective it is.
That's right, yeah.
Right, so
which
you're
is a big
kind
problem
of like,
for most people.
Yeah, so if you're doing it correctly, you're doing it innocently and without any sort of effort or control or manipulation, and grace conducts the process, if we want to use the word grace. Then another way of looking at it is, that saying, God helps those who help themselves, or there's this Zen saying, that enlightenment may be an accident, but spiritual practice makes you accident prone.
Right.
So, you know, you do all this stuff and you kind of, you submit or subject yourself to this transformation, which is really grace doing the transforming, but you bring yourself to a state of preparedness or readiness where enlightenment or awakening is much more likely to happen because you're not full of crud. You know, you've sort of you've prepared the vehicle to make it a fit vessel. You don't pour new wine into old wineskins. You know, you prepare a new wineskin.
Yeah, I would agree with that to some extent, but you know, right now we're talking about my experience, and it's not theory. For me, it didn't work. It stopped working. You know, I after like 35, 40 years in the movement, I realized I was suffering, that my major faults were not healing or going away, and that no effort or no beautiful experience ever seemed to last or give me any real life in pure consciousness, like connection to the Absolute. It wasn't happening.
Although in retrospect, although it didn't happen, do you feel like that was in any sense a waste of time, or do you feel like that was all preparatory and had its own value?
I feel it had tremendous value. I feel it was preparatory. So I don't regret it.
Right.
And in fact, looking back on it all, the day doesn't go by when I'm not extremely grateful to Maharishi for what I got from it. And in fact, I think I'm more grateful to him for the years I had around him and the total smashing of my conditioning that occurred at that time, because he had no conditioning, and he just sort of smashed your boundaries, your beliefs, your ego. You know, everything was just laid waste around him. Anything relative had no value real to him. You know, and then all the years on Purusha, the different projects we had. You know, he would have us do all these insane things that put tremendous pressure on you. You know, I just remember the Natural Law Party when we were running candidates, and I was in the group, the publicity group, where I have to call up these cynical reporters all the time and tell them, you know, oh, I'm running a wacko physicist for president. Would you like to write an article about him?
You know, that's one of the reasons I got into computers, was I could just absorb myself in this screen and not have to deal with people. Because I'm good with dealing with people, but in the TM movement, you had to sort of deal with people who didn't want to deal with you.
That's right.
And I hated that. And I hated asking for money to support me and all that stuff. And so it's like I just got lost in my little computer world.
Well, that's one of the things I'm grateful for. You know, if I sum it up, I just think it broke so many boundaries. It made me very bold and fearless in life. You know, in what I do. You know, it's just water. Everything's sort of water off a duck's back. If someone thinks I'm crazy and wacko, it's fine, I'm crazy and wacko. You know, you can, you know, good. You know, enjoy your beliefs, your perceptions, whatever.
You know, one thing I wanted to ask you that sort of relates to what we've just been saying is, you know, you and I have known each other really well over the years, and we both, you know, are aware of the phases that we each went through where we really were kind of crazy. I mean, you know, on long courses and stuff, I mean, you had a period where you had to be watched because you were going to climb out your window and go in town and do God knows what. And, you know,
I was like,
you had an eating problem or something.
Yeah, so I would
go and eat
get
donuts or something.
No, better than that. Ice cream sundaes in Switzerland, or, you know, just go out for a good meal in a Swiss restaurant or something.
Doesn't sound like there's anything wrong with that. But
well, we weren't supposed to do that. And the nature of it was, I just was, you know, supposed to be meditating, and I just couldn't take that austerity.
Yeah.
And I was just like, so there was like a tremendous pressure and stress release built up inside that drove me to do those things. It was just like a tremendous drive. And then afterwards I would feel very guilty and things like that. And yeah, so that, you know, that was...
Well, people are going to listen to this and they're going to think, well, geez, I mean, the problem was not with you, it was with the routine. There's no harm in going out and having a good meal. But I mean, and you know me, and you know how kooky I've been at times in my life. And I just wonder sometimes whether going through a kind of a dark night of the soul in the form of really... You get turned inside out, and all the your idiosyncrasies and your obsessions and your all kinds of stuff just come to the surface, and you know, to the observer, you may appear to be quite odd and quite
Right.
maladjusted, you
Right,
know, with
right,
normal
right.
life. But it's kind of a minefield you have to go through, and you eventually kind of come out the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's worth mentioning, I guess,
Yeah.
because it might be something people are going through.
Well, that's very true. And to me, okay, so this brings up, you know, we're jumping back and forth between the present and the last years in the oneness movement and TM. And for me, all those types of behaviors we're talking about are basically healings of the stuff that we have inside us. It has to come out. If you're on a spiritual path, like Meister Eckhart said many thousands, hundreds of years ago, you know, spiritual growth is a process of subtraction, not addition. The veils come off, you release your charges, your addictions, things like that. They have to come out. And, okay, to me, the system, the meditating, even though it takes you deep and you relax and something comes out, and there's a certain amount of grace in there that's describing it, it doesn't teach you to deal with these behaviors, these addictions, a lot of this negativity that you have in the way that will really heal it. It doesn't come out. What works for me is the non-dual teaching, what the non-dual teachers teach, which is what we teach in the oneness movement, in addition to the very powerful grace that's transmitted through the Diksha and the oneness meditation. And there's many ways that we receive grace in that movement because the divine wants to give it. But the teaching is what most of the non-dual teachers teach, which is you have to accept who you are if you want to heal it. You have to learn to stay with the negativity that's coming out. In oneness, they used to teach us, be bad. Don't act bad, be bad. If you're angry, let the anger swallow you. Let yourself be completely absorbed in that energy. And what's happening when that does is, it's like Marshi's feeling the body, but it's much more elaborated. Where
So, and Marshi's feeling the body was, why don't you just explain that?
okay, Marshi's feeling the body, you know, he taught all the teachers a technique called the checking points, the 30 points of checking. And one of those points is called like overpowering thoughts in meditation, in which he tells you, and that overpowering thoughts in meditation, that teaching, I love it because it's like the sutra form of this much more elaborated teaching of experiencing what is and healing it.
And I just want to add that this is relevant to people. Most of the people listening to this won't have practiced TM, but this is relevant to everybody really, because it's a kind of a fundamental principle, I think, that many teachers reflect upon. And
right.
That's what you're probably going to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and so the teaching, the way Marshi elaborated it in very succinct form, was he said that whatever you're experiencing, so say something makes you angry, someone says something or does something to you that hurts you and makes you angry, it's not about that. It's a trigger. You might be with someone who doesn't have the anger on that particular issue inside them, and the same thing happens, and they're not triggered. They don't get angry. They don't respond. They don't react. You've reacted like that because you have the seed in you. So the teaching is that those seeds are your karmas. Those are impressions, memories from past lives, from childhood, from your ancestors. And what I see in my medical intuitive work is that all health problems, psycho-emotional problems, spiritual, originate in these spiritual blockages. They have they're like energy knots, and they're in the nadi system. Nadis are like energy nerves that connect the material with pure consciousness. It's the means, the mechanism through which the pure energy of consciousness, the field, converts itself into a body or into a house or whatever. You know, it has to transform itself. You know, everybody.
So to illustrate the point you just made, so if two people are driving along in separate cars and somebody cuts them both off, one person may get angry and the other just take it in stride.
That's right.
Because the one person has sort of seeds of impressions, which or their makeup is such.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just their temperament.
Yeah.
They're more of a pitta
Right.
kind of a personality. They're going to react. The other person isn't.
That's right. Yeah. And I wouldn't say it's because of the temperament. I would say it's because they have some incomplete experience, some knot of memory in them that's getting triggered. So getting cut off was a blessing because this dormant blockage in their system got released and the energy's coming out. So this could be something of any form. It could be something that makes you jealous, angry, lustful.
So the Israelis and the Palestinians are blessing the heck out of each other.
That's right. Yeah, in a way they are, but in a way they are, but they don't know how to deal with it. They and what Maharishi brings out is that it's not about the experience that triggered you. When the seed energy gets released, it floods you with the energy of the experience that caused it. So you get flooded with anger or whatever it might be. And your mind is this like being, it has its own identity, a totally illusory identity, which causes it to place your current experience of the car cutting you off as an explanation for why you're angry. So this could be anything. Someone says something to you, you're hurt, and it's all because of your sense of ego and mind that you explain it that way. But it's triggered you, it's blessed you in a way. So the teaching, so Maharishi's teaching, which again is much more elaborated by other teachers like Adyashanti, Eckhart Tolle, Francis Lucille is a teacher I like, Papaji in India, Ramesh Balsekar, Nisargadatta, all the non-dual teachers teach something like this, where you come back, where you drop the story. So obviously you're driving the car, you can't do this, but ideally you would stop, close your eyes, go inside, and just be with your anger. Be angry without trying to resist it or analyze it. And this is a challenge, because our whole conditioning is you have to do something. You don't get anywhere without doing some work, without doing something.
One little point to throw in is that the way Maharishi phrased it was that the mind doesn't like to have a feeling in the abstract without assigning some kind of rationale to it. So, and he also talked about this during meditation itself, not just cars cutting people off, but you might be sitting meditating and some feeling comes up due to some deep impression that's being released, and you attach it to something. You begin to feel negative toward a friend, or you feel like you want to leave the program, or you feel like you need to climb out the window and go get a big meal. But it's really not about that. It's just that the mind is assigning something.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's right.
I just want to kind of reiterate it.
And so when you stay on that level of the mind assigning it, you're in the mind, you're in the clouds, you get nowhere. You're never going to heal it. What you have to do is come back to the physical feeling of the anger, of the jealousy, of the lust, of the food craving, whatever it is, and just let it over you. In oneness we call it the art of suffering, because it may be a strong fear and it doesn't feel good, but you let it swallow you. We say most of the people in the world are like hanging from a light fixture in the ceiling, while the tiger of their negativity is waiting to devour them. And the only way you heal it is to let go and let the tiger eat you. You let the energy of the experience completely take you over, and you just experience it and you feel it. Now, the reason that works is because who are you? You think you're the mind or the ego, you think you're this person? No, you are being, you are pure consciousness. You are the field of energy. There's nothing but God, there's nothing but that energy. And so your attention, when the mind is not operating, when you're not doing anything, is pure consciousness. And it can dissolve anything. It can dissolve these blockages that are in you. So when you can connect the knot of karma that's inside you about the anger, the jealousy, the fear, whatever it is, with awareness, without getting caught up in the story, without letting the mind assign a meaning to it, just that experience allows you to complete the experience. In oneness we say these charges, these stresses are the result of experiences that were not complete. And so they left a knot of incompleteness in you. So something hurt you, made you angry, and you couldn't accept it. You couldn't let it complete itself. You held it. And so that could be, or maybe you were in a war and you saw everyone wiped out, and you were in tremendous fear and anger, and you stored all that because you couldn't accept it. It was too painful, and you stored it. And now it's coming out, and when you start to think about it and ascribe it to what triggered it in your current life, you're in the mind and you get nowhere. Whereas this teaching allows you to dissolve it, to heal it, just with your attention by doing nothing. You know?
So let's say, to take an extreme example, let's say that you are one of the Sandy Hook parents. And for those who are not aware of it, watching around the world, there was a town in Connecticut where a guy went into a school and shot up a bunch of 5- and 6-year-olds
killed them
with an automatic weapon. And let's say you had gone through the oneness program or whatever spiritual practices you had gone through, and it had brought you to a point where you had worked out all these charges, resolved them. How do you suppose that such a parent would react to their child being killed as compared to the ordinary person?
They would experience grief and sorrow and anger and all those things, and they would just pass right through them. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about someone who's awakened here. Awakened, when you're awakened, it's not a state anymore. It doesn't come and go. Mm-hmm. You're living a level of pure consciousness where the mind is separate from you. So the mind, the emotions, the ego, they exist. They're tools. You cannot function in a body without a mind and an ego and an intellect. Otherwise you're going to walk into walls, or whatever. You
distinguish your mouth from your ear.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be able to perceive these things, but it's all gotten out of perspective in this age of ignorance in Kali Yuga, where the mind and the sense of separation and fear have dominated. The fight and flight response is dominant. All these different outcomes of Kali Yuga, of this age of ignorance that we're hopefully coming out of now, have taken over. I always love this quote from, I don't remember the exact words, Anandamoy Ma, who was a female avatar in the last century. By avatar I mean someone who's like born enlightened in a very high state and has some mission in life, some definite purpose. So it's like an amazing soul that took a human body for some purpose. And she said that that the divine plan is that the divine sits in all our hearts and guides our lives so that everything can work out perfectly, because only the divine intelligence can organize everything without a flaw. Mm-hmm. Whereas the mind will just make a mess out of it. The human mind can't do it. You can't comprehend all the variables. Only the cosmic computer can. Only the divine can. But what happened in Kali Yuga is that the mind dominated and suppressed the heart and took over. And so the mind made a royal mess out of the world, to the point where we're ready to blow ourselves up and destroy we're destroying our planet just so that we can make money, or kill people and bomb them, so the heart has to come back to the fore, mm-hmm. because that's where the divine lives in all of us and can organize our lives so that everything flows seamlessly. Mm. And
so you're saying that somehow the TM movement wasn't doing that for you, but the oneness movement picked up where TM left off.
The teaching wasn't elaborated enough that you have to face yourself. You have to face your addictions, sit with them, be them, accept them, and
it was more the emphasis on transcending.
It was all the emphasis was just meditate twice a day and everything's going to take care of itself. Just do your program. Yeah, and I don't see that. As you said, there are some people who that worked for them.
But maybe not as many as there should be after 40 years of practice.
Well, that's my point.
Yeah.
And I think the ones who got awakened probably could have got awakened by eating pizza. Like that.
They probably did that too.
They probably did that too. But not take away. They're great techniques and they're very helpful.
Yeah.
And and they give deep relaxation and they're great stress release in the world. But we were totally consumed with enlightenment, with awakening. That was our purpose, and it wasn't delivering that on any kind of a scale that I could see in my life. Mm-hmm. Now what's very interesting is I was talking about how Maharishi in the checking point described that in not very elaborated form, but very perfect. He really summed it up. And he actually told a number of groups in the movement whom he must have felt were able to hear it, to apply that teaching from those checking points all the time. But he never made it movement-wide. He never told our monks group, our male monks group, he never told us that. He told the female monks group that, the Mother Divine program. And I've had this conversation with a number of people who were on different teacher training courses where he told them to apply that point.
And so, practically speaking, if you were telling somebody to apply that all the time, what would you tell them exactly?
Yeah, which I do all the time in my work.
Okay.
I tell, because these stresses are at the root of your health problems.
So you're talking to thousands of people right now?
Yeah. So
explain to them how to do that all the time.
Okay. So it's kind of what I was talking about before. Basically, you have to learn to do nothing. So something triggers you. So your ideal situation is you're at home and maybe you get a phone call and someone says something which hurts you. So you feel a lot of, or let's say you're at home and all of a sudden you start worrying about your money, that you're going to starve someday, you're going to be out of your house. So what is that? That's the mind making up a story. Do you know the future? Can you control the future? There's always something to worry about. Your mind is going to manufacture, this issue and that issue, this fantasy, that fantasy. It creates scenarios all the time. That's its job, because it's trying to keep you from connecting with your true nature, which is pure consciousness, which is the divine. It's like it has its own existence and it wants to protect it. And so when something triggers you, you're at home and you start worrying, you start feeling some fear. I'm going to run out of money, I can't retire, whatever. The teaching is that that fear has nothing to do with your current economic situation. It's something you're holding inside you from the past. It could be from your childhood, from when you were in the womb. It could be from a past life. It could be from something that happened anytime during your life. It could be from your ancestral line. So you can't know what it's really all about. It's like endless trying to figure it out. You don't have to know. Instead, close your eyes, or you don't have to close your eyes, and let yourself drown in your fear. It's not about the story of that you're going to run out of the money and starve and be homeless and die on the street. It's about your fear. It's about the knot of fear that you're holding inside you, in your energetic nervous system. And when you can let yourself sink into that and experience the fear without a story, it will heal, it will dissolve. And I guarantee you, try this, and usually after a minute or two, you get a wave of bliss, a wave of joy. Why? Because that fear, as I said earlier in this, is like a knot in your energetic system that connects the divine with the material. And when that knot dissolves, you've opened up another channel to the divine. You open up, and the nature of the divine is joy, it's bliss. So you get like a wave of joy. Now the deeper, more powerful ones, they come back over and over, they have many levels, and you may not feel a wave of joy, and you may just say, well, okay, I'm still in fear, but I have to go to work, whatever. But believe me, you stay with this, and you find that you are transforming, that your behaviors, and that's what frustrated me in Maharishi's movement was, that teaching wasn't elaborated, it wasn't given to us, and I never stood there face to face and experienced my suffering.
You were suffering, but you were kind of
escaping, sweeping under the carpet.
Right, you were never kind of turning and facing it full on.
That's right, and I was always trying to do something. Something would come up and I would like suppress it. I say, no, that's not good, that's not right thinking. I would judge it. And that's what everyone does, that's what we all do. That's the conditioning. Most people are out there and you're wrestling with yourself all the time. You have inner conflict, you have an inner dialogue going on. All that is taking place.
And of course, people who take drugs and stuff, they're just trying to mute it or numb it.
Yeah.
And or not only drugs, but doing all kinds of things to distract themselves from it. And you're just saying stop and just face it full on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what percentage, but I think most of the world's economy is built on escapism.
Yeah.
People are watching television, they're reading, escapist books, they're drinking, they're eating, taking drugs, they're eating food, they're fighting. There's elaborate stories which are all about escaping
Mm.
You know, I mean, the world economy is built on it.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a way, you just alluded to your own experience because you had a financial setback recently in which you had invested a lot of money with some guy that turned out not to be trustworthy, and that was kind of a unfortunate turn of events. And so, but you dealt with it by really just feeling it fully, and it passed through rather quickly.
Yeah, I just accept it. You know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was harder for me, but you know, in the oneness movement. You know, the permanent awakened condition is being given on a massive scale right now to people at whatever level they're at.
Mm.
You don't have to become some great Ramakrishna or, you know, some great Maharishi or some great Yogananda to be awakened.
Mm-hmm.
You can awaken at a very low level of consciousness, in the sense that, and I'm defining awakening as a declutching of the mind, where you become free of the mind, where it doesn't control you anymore, that you're separate from it. You don't see yourself as the mind, whereas before you identify yourself as these thoughts, as this person, whereas what the mind is doing is it's creating a personality out of a totally disconnected array of old memories from past lives, things like that, that aren't really connected. And so your mind creates this whole idea of a person, of a personality, whereas in oneness we say you're a crowd, you're not a person.
Hmm.
And when you have that disconnect, these things pass through you very quickly. You know, you become free of the mind. So, like you say, if something tragic happens, you're going to feel grief and sorrow, and it's going to pass through you. You lose all your money, like I did. It passes through, and you just continue. You know, you just at some point, it doesn't hang on and eat you up anymore.
Mm.
Whereas before, it ate you up.
Yeah.
So
and it didn't help you any in terms of your financial situation. It didn't help bring the money back to be eaten up.
No, it didn't. No. But
in fact, it might bring the money back sooner to be not eaten up and to be able to just roll with it and keep on.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Hmm. So a lot of people use the term awakening these days, and you know, I hear people all the time saying, well, when I had my awakening, or I awoke, or this or that, and I'm always a little bit not, you know, uncertain as to exactly what they're referring to, because there doesn't seem to be a universally agreed upon definition of the term. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, based on my experience, both within myself and with other people, there seem to be, you know, many stages of awakening after awakening after awakening, mm-hmm. and I don't know that those stages ever end. Although even, you know, at a certain point, there's that which is, which essentially you are, mm-hmm. is, I mean, it's recognized and it's never going to change or get improved upon, mm-hmm. but your ability to reflect it or express it, your ability to be an instrument through which that can shine in the world. No end to the refinement of that.
Beautiful,
so
that's great. That's one of the things I love about, you know, the teaching in the oneness movement is phenomenal. I mean, he basically says awakening is on a scale of 1 to 100, mm-hmm. and he says enlightenment isn't until you hit 70. Hmm. So awakening is at a.
So you can have a 1 awakening, a 2 awakening,
and you do.
Yeah,
and you do in India on these different courses that we have mm-hmm. at the Oneness University, the deepening course. Everybody who goes there gets awakened.
By whatever this definition
by this definition of a declutching of the mind. So they may be awakened at a 1 or 2.
Now, are there degrees of declutching? I mean, is it at a 100% severance, complete declutching, or are you declutched to a certain degree relative to the way you used to be?
You are declutched, but it's a very important question. They use the analogy there is that you're speeding along the freeway normally with everything going at like 180 miles an hour, and when you awaken, the engine switches off, and it can take a long time before the car stops coasting mm-hmm. and gets to a stop, where you start to really experience the games of the mind and the ego as secondary, where you're onto it, where you have so much silence that it's not going, where the mind doesn't trick you anymore mm-hmm. into its games.
So by your definition, a person could be awakened, but they could still be tricked.
Yeah, for some time.
And it seems like there would be degrees of trickery. You know, some things which would just sort of trip you up for a minute, and other things which would become all-consuming for a while.
That's right. Yeah.
So if it's really all-consuming, how could you call that person awakened? Isn't it just sort of you've lowered the bar quite a bit?
No, I would say they're awakened because what happens after you awaken is is this process I've been describing for healing by doing nothing, by experiencing, becomes automatic. Mm-hmm. So I would say awakening is a process of extreme growth, of very rapid growth. I would say that is perhaps one of the major gifts of awakening that you happen. So even if you awaken at 1, whatever declutching happens allows you to move into this experience of purification constantly. Mm-hmm. So you're going to get overwhelmed, and the deeper, stronger drives are going to grip you to some extent as time goes on. But progressively, so what's been the joy to me is when I left the TM movement, because I was stuck. The things weren't moving. And after awakening, everything's moving really fast. Mm-hmm. So it's not that I'm this great person or anything like that. I'm who I am. But but what's really satisfying to someone, I gave my whole life for evolution. I gave my life to Maharishi, my whole adult life. And it's because I wanted enlightenment, I wanted growth, and I wanted to serve and bring something to the world. So that was great, no regrets, and it got me to this point where I found oneness. And oneness delivered this awakening, which uncorked everything. Mm-hmm. So when you're not attached, when the mind is detached, is declutched, the karmas release very rapidly. And a lot of people, when they awaken, have go through dramas, and and they're forming little groups and stuff to help each other understand it. Because here's the difference: you don't have the inner conflict anymore. When your stuff comes out, it's gangbusters. When your energies are releasing, and somehow you just stop resisting it. Mm. So on the outside, it may look the same, but inside, you don't have the resistance or the judgment. You're not like trying to suppress it, trying to judge it and say, this is bad, I shouldn't do this, I'm a bad person, I have to change it. You accept it.
So you just stop all that manipulation and suppression.
And when you do that, you stop suffering. That's the greatest joy. I suffered like crazy, and now, even when my worst crap comes out, I don't suffer. Because I don't have an inner conflict or a dialogue about it.
I guess you're officially no longer Jewish, right?
Yeah. Right. That's a good definition of Jewish. At least East Coast Jewish or something like that.
So, how does oneness accomplish this for people?
Grace. Okay, so...
Who's grace? What grace?
So, beautiful. That's a great question. So, those of you who are watching, you can believe it or not. You may be skeptical or not, but my experience at Amen Bhagavan, the founders of the Oneness movement, is they are avatars, very high beings who have come at this time of the phase transition to move to help, to be one of the ways through which the divine is creating a golden age by delivering this awakening to many people. Mm-hmm. And they call it a brain surgery. They call it, where the divine actually works on you, and we have 2 main avenues of connecting people to the divine energy. One is called the Oneness Blessing or Oneness Diksha, where the hands are placed lightly on the head. Mm-hmm. The other is the Oneness Meditation, where the Oneness Meditator is initiated so that they can be completely consumed by Amma Bhagavan, or by the divine. I'm a Oneness Meditator, and sometimes I'm consumed by Christ. Sometimes I'm consumed by Krishna. Sometimes I'm consumed by Durga. Sometimes I'm consumed by Amma Bhagavan. And
what is the experience of being consumed by this or that?
Extreme bliss. Mm-hmm. The only difference, they're just faces of the divine. The divine is that one pure energy, and I just happen to know who's coming through. Like if it's a divine mother, I'll feel more nurturing love in my experience, and usually he or she will show themselves visually to me, and they might say something to me like that, you know. I was a little bit off track, but I'll backtrack to like one of the sort of main stories of my life. Like when I was 7 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was being gripped by this sort of tractor beam, you know, like a Star Trek tractor beam of intense energy. And it was so powerful I could hear it. The room was humming. And then this godlike voice says, "My son, get out of bed, go out the door, and you'll see God in Jesus Christ." So anyway, I'm this little Jewish kid whose parents have raised me since World War II to think that every Christian hates us and wants to kill us, you know, and so I had that conditioning. So I didn't go. I curled up in fear. Jesus Christ, what's going to happen? So I didn't go. So after I became a TM meditator and started opening up to spiritual reality, you know, I spent my whole life regretting that I didn't go and wondering what would have happened.
Yeah.
So later, you know, I had a private interview with Sri Bhagavan, and I figured this is my one chance to ask someone who can tell me what would have happened. And he said, "You would have been awakened by the grace of that experience, and by now you would be in unity consciousness." So I was like, damn. You know? And it would have been a different life. But you know, I wasn't ready for it, so it just wasn't the way it was written. You know, it didn't happen. So anyway.
So you're talking about the two ways in which there's the,
well, I really got
there's the
backtracked.
Diksha and the oneness meditation.
Yeah, okay, well I really got backtracked. Should I finish the story?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I thought you were
Okay,
finished.
so I'll finish the story. So that happened then as I found out that. So the next stage of this is, after that I read these beautiful books about Anastasia, this Russian divine mother avatar. She's a phenomenal avatar, alive now, living in Siberia year-round without a house, in the woods, you know. You know, put that in your pipe and smoke it, you know. And doing phenomenal work. And these books are just so inspiring and beautiful. And there was one scene in there where she had just been through something that was very taxing to her body. And this golden ball manifests in the middle of the woods, and out of it steps this beautiful young being made of blue light. A light, it was like about a 10-year-old boy. And somehow that image just really captured me. I just sort of fell in love with it, with that being. And I said, oh, it's so beautiful. It really moved me. It caught my heart. Other places in that book, when people say, "Who are you?" she says, "I'm the sister of Jesus." So, anyway, about a few months after that, I was in India on a course, and I was asking one of the guides who will conduct the courses there, who are in very beautiful levels of consciousness. These people really live the reality of what they teach. Very inspiring and beautiful to be around them. And I was asking one of these guides about it, and she said, when the divine I left out a stage. So a few months after reading that, this little boy Blue came out of nowhere and goes into my heart and stays there. You know, and I thought, well, that's cool. You know, and I'm sort of wondering, who are you and why have you come? So I asked her about it, and she said, when the divine comes to you like that, unsought, unlooked for, the divine has a purpose. So you need to keep talking to your little boy Blue and asking him, who are you and why have you come? So a few months after that, I was during a oneness meditation. I'd had that question in mind for all those months, those different questions. My little boy Blue sort of showed himself in the oneness meditation and said, I came to bless through you. And that's what the oneness meditation is. It's a powerful divine energy that just takes the person over and blesses them, and blesses the people who experience it. And then the next night, the rest of my questions were answered. He came back again, and he said, I'm Jesus. I took this form so that I wouldn't scare you this time. So that sort of completed the experience.
Yeah.
It was nice. So the oneness, so I was talking about the different forms through which divine energy is given to people to help them in their growth, the different form of divine grace. One is this hands-on oneness meditation, and the other is the hands-on blessing. The other is the oneness meditation that's given through the eyes. The Oneness movement also has a very major devotional component, which you may also find with Amaji and others, where if you go to a picture or an image of the divine, and in Oneness we're not really attached to that. It has to be Ama Bhagavan. They say, go to your divine, put your hands up like a half-inch away from the picture, close your eyes and ask for a blessing. In Oneness, it happens. If I go up to a picture of any divine and I do that with reverence, I feel I get a strong rush of bliss, of energy that helps to transform me. Mm-hmm. So the components for very rapid spiritual growth in Oneness that's worked for me is this combination of grace and non-resistance, non-doing in the face of my deepest faults and my deepest struggles and my deepest addictions. Is that acceptance, is letting the tiger of my fear eat me. And the story of the personal awakening for me was Ama Bhagavan wanted the Oneness meditators to be awakened, and they wanted to guarantee that. So they brought us each over to India. They determined sort of astrologically, or in some mystical way actually, what an auspicious day for each one of us that would be particularly conducive to awakening. And so they...
How many of you were there? Thousands?
There are only about 60, 70 in the world.
Oneness meditators?
Oneness meditators, the ones who've been to give through the eyes.
Which is what you did
Which is what I did the other night.
Okay.
Yeah, who give it through the eyes,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And we underwent, a special initiation. No training at all.
Oh.
We don't do anything.
Initiation.
It's an initiation. It's like a hookup.
Okay.
And
I'll ask you some questions about that when you finish this.
So anyway, they wanted us to be awakened,
Mm-hmm.
and so they brought us to India over this auspicious date. And then, so like 2 days before your date, they locked you in a cave, like in a dark room. There's no light,
Mm-hmm.
nothing. It's just you. There's a bathroom and a bed, and nothing else. And you can't take anything in there with you except a change of clothes or whatever. And they give you a towel, and you have your bathroom with shower and toilet and everything you need. Give you all the water you can drink, your choice of sweetened or unsweetened lemonade, and one piece of fruit a day. They come and visit you, and give you a piece of fruit. And I was very shocked by my experience when I went in there, because with Marshi's training, like I say, one of the things I'm very grateful to him for is the sort of boldness and fearlessness that I got about what I was doing, because of all the totally insane, wacko things he made us do. So I had to constantly interface with a judgmental, very ignorant set of values in the world, with something that was completely foreign to them, and that you were having to stand up and represent. And so that created, like I say, a lot of fearlessness. So I thought, so when that door locked, I commenced on a 3-day panic attack, where I was just in terror and fear the whole time.
And you probably thought it was going to be a piece of cake, because you could just sit there and meditate.
Exactly. I thought it was going to be a piece of cake. I did. And especially because I had talked to about 10 or 15 other Oneness meditators who had been there for their date. Mm-hmm. And one girl said, this Brazilian girl said, I slept the whole time, And they basically all said, it was easy, no big deal. So I thought, well, okay, whatever. But not me. I had I was just consumed with fear. And
day and night, couldn't sleep.
Day and night. Yeah. I got a few hours sleep here and there.
You wake up and be fearful again.
Yeah, and there were only a few things that got me through it. One is that I was experiencing this, what in Oneness we call this brain surgery, this shifting, a neurobiological shift in the nervous system that the divine gives you. So that's why the Oneness movement is delivering awakening, because the divine wants to awaken you. The divine is omnipresent, so you put yourself in the situation in receiving the Diksha or the Oneness meditation, or going on these courses in India, and the divine works on you. Because the divine is you. It doesn't need to, have a formal introduction. It can give you what you need. So I was experiencing the whole 3 days, radical shifts, which actually felt great. So I'm in terror, and there's this blissful feeling in my brain or my heart chakra or whatever, different parts of the body. and figure, well, okay, something's going on. I got to stick this out. I can't go. They leave you a key in case you can't take it. So, and I contemplated running out on the street, screaming, I can't make it on, but I didn't. I'm in there. And the other thing that really helped me was somehow the divine gave me visions of how the fears from my past life were implanted in me in this body. I saw that my parents were in terror at the end of World War II, being Jewish. That when I was conceived and in the womb, the war wasn't over yet. That Hitler was going to win the war and we'd all be killed. And I also saw that I was an accident. And they didn't really want me, and they never really did. And that was my karma. I don't blame them. I don't believe in victims. Everything is what you have coming to you. That would help the Arabs and the Israelis a lot too if they got out of the victim psychology, both of them, But anyway, it helped a lot to see that and to know that, just these little things sort of kept me going, and they kept me from running out in the street screaming, and at the end of the 3 days, all of a sudden it abated. It just stopped, and after that, everything was different, And so I didn't do anything. I just experienced the fear, and the divine worked on my nervous system.
So was that the initiation itself, being in that dark room for 3 days?
To be a
or was that the preparation and then you came out?
That was awakening.
That was awakening.
That was awakening. After that, awakening had been given, after that, I no longer experienced myself as a person. I experienced life now as a process. It was like there's just this going on. There's talking going on right now. There's hearing going on right now. There's eating going on. There's not someone who's awakened. Just awakening is like a phenomenon that happens to a nervous system, and you just go on like that.
But thousands of people are getting this.
Hundreds of thousands are getting this awakening, but many of them are at a 1 or a 2 when they awaken. But the main thing is that they get it. So the initiation to be a oneness meditator came, before that, actually, before I was awakened.
And why are there only 60 or 70 in this huge thing of hundreds of thousands? How did you qualify for that?
Well, it's a total mystical thing. There's a group of monks who are in high levels of enlightenment at Oneness University. And the oneness meditators are selected in a totally mystical process. They go into a communion with God, and all the people who are oneness trainers are those who can teach others to be Diksha givers, to give the hands-on blessing. And so all the trainers have obviously exhibited a certain amount of commitment and passion.
You were
some
a trainer.
More than others. So I was a trainer. So the names of the
because Diksha givers are quite numerous, but
hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands, but then trainers are more select, more exclusive.
Yeah.
But then actual oneness meditators are more exclusive still. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the trainer, anyone can become a trainer.
Okay.
Anyone can become a blessing, a oneness Diksha giver. Anyone can become a trainer. You go take a 10-day course in India, and you're trained, and you're a trainer.
Yeah.
And they don't put you through a rigorous acceptance drama. It's pretty much everyone who wants to goes. There's no course office in oneness. So the names of the trainers are read while these people are in this communion. They're deep in samadhi, and they have to like a minimum of apparently 7 have to hear, yes, this person could hold this energy, could do this.
So just hearing the name Eric Eisen, they get a
communion. They get a communion from the divine. I don't know the details of how it comes to them.
But some little light goes off, and they
all have to go in and say, yeah, this one, okay, and that's how the selection is.
So you got a knock on the door one day, and you've been selected?
So I was on a course in India, and it was the last day of the course, and the next day I was getting on a plane to go home, and after the last meeting, one of the guides, we call them dasas in Sanskrit, they're guides, comes up to me after the class and says, be outside your dorm at 5 in the morning tomorrow. You're going to be initiated as a oneness meditator. So I go out at 5 in the morning, they take me over to the Oneness Temple, which is a phenomenally powerful temple, as many temples in India are. This one's really special. has a really amazing beauty and energy. And I went through the initiation, which was a powerful, like a yagya, whole Vedic ceremony with fires and offerings and things like that. And then I was given different meditations to do during it while that went on. And the experience was of being like reamed out by golden light. I just felt every cell in my body was just like consumed by golden light, and extremely blissful, So it was a tremendous cleansing and opening, and giving the oneness meditation is kind of like that. It's like every cell in the body. So when I'm doing it, I don't, I'm not there. I'm not doing anything.
Yeah, I mean, I went through it the other night, and it was powerful. I mean, I don't usually experience subtle perceptions and all, but I could see a lot of light around you and light coming out of your hands and everything. And I don't usually experience that kind of stuff. And there was definitely a palpable feeling in the room that really deepened profoundly. And I thought the music was a little hokey, but I mean, Amma has music going on all the time too while she's doing her thing. I think she just doesn't want it to be completely silent. Maybe people fall asleep or something.
We say that music helps to open the heart. So if you like the music,
keeps you out of the head.
You may feel it's hokey, but some people like it, and so it keeps you out of the head. Just enjoy. If you can enjoy the music, it helps to keep the mind. Because the only people I've met who don't have any kind of the experiences you're describing with the oneness meditation or even the Diksha are the ones, they may have had too much coffee or whatever, but there's just too much going on in their head, and so they can't connect,
can't settle in
to what their senses are experiencing. It's a life of the mind and not the senses.
When Amma does questions and answers on retreats, at the end of like an hour doing questions and answers, she just sort of stops that and sings a couple simple little bhajans and gets everybody clapping, and everybody comes back out of their heads down in their hearts.
That's what we do. In oneness, we stop and dance. They have classes, and then they stop. They put on some great music, and you get up and dance, and clap,
just to get yourself out of your head.
Get out of the head. And it works.
So you mentioned like hundreds of thousands of people and all. What's it like over there? Is it a huge place?
Most of them in India. Most of them Indians. Most of those hundreds of thousands who are awakened are Indians, and they're awakened through the different processes that are made available to them, and they awaken much more easily than Westerners. They're more in their hearts. They don't have such a dominant mind, and they have the tradition of the divine. So they have a more bhakti. Oneness has a big bhakti component, devotion to the divine, and we don't say it has to be Amma Bhagavan. It could be Amma, could be anyone, whoever it is for you, Jesus, whatever. So if you have that bhakti component, it makes it easier. And so hundreds and hundreds of thousands, I don't know the exact quote, every month they release a total of the number of people who are awakened in the world, and it's not oneness,
not just them,
not just oneness.
Anybody anywhere.
It's just anybody anywhere from any tradition, and it's grown to well over 1 million in less than a year.
I heard you mention that the other night, and I was wondering, how do they determine that? Is it just some kind of Ooga Booga cognition thing?
It's the same thing as the selection of the oneness meditators.
They somehow
go into a state,
feel the pulse of the world or something.
It's not that cognitive. It's like they connect to the divine, and the divine knows, because the divine is everybody. The divine knows how many, if you are, and Amma Bhagavan are avatars, so you can dispute that. This and that.
I'm cool.
I'm just talking to the camera because I get that reaction with people.
I don't think that. I think there could be a number of avatars in the world at any given time. It doesn't have to. If you believe in avatars.
Right now, in my awareness, there's at least 6 that I know of. Mother Mira, Amaji. Mother Mira, Amaji, Karuna Mai is Saraswati avatar.
Amma
Bhagavan and Anastasia in Russia.
And there may be more.
And there may be more.
And again, an avatar just means the divine has taken birth. We're all the divine, but ordinarily the vast majority forget that they are, and so they have to go through this whole drama that they're gripped by. But the divine taking birth without forgetting is an avatar.
Not even in oneness, we have even a more liberal definition of that. We would say that like some great soul takes a mission, and it may not be, they may not remember their true nature,
Right.
For example, Bhagavan
Happened with Rama.
likes to say Einstein was an avatar of science. You know, he changed the whole world. He started the flip of science towards where it's coming to the same understanding as the spiritual traditions of the universe. That everything's just energy. So he's flipped that switch. So he was an avatar of science for that particular mission. He was brilliant, you know, because he was a very high soul.
He cognized it. I mean, other scientists said, how in the world did he come up with that? You know, it was like just out of the blue. While he was a 20-year-old patent, patent clerk.
Exactly. And then we say, like Mozart, he's writing symphonies at 8. You know, look at the influence the great musicians have had. You know, Bach. What kind of a inspiring. Beethoven, Brahms, Tchaikovsky, Mozart. Many of them. They're coming from Gandharva Loka, celestial realm, and they're tapped into the beautiful music. And even I've never heard Amma Bhagavan say this, but in my opinion, the Beatles wrote phenomenal music, and they helped to transform the generation, the culture. But there was a lot of spiritual content in what they put. They stopped writing
boyfriend girlfriend kind of stuff.
Boyfriend, early on, and got into some fairly profound lyrics. And so I think that they were kind of avatars. They had a profound shift. So I would call all of those avatars. For me, it's also an experience. I think there's a difference between your concept and your experience. The first time I meditated with Bhagavan, I saw him transform into an infinite field of gold. And within that gold, I saw Maharshi and Gurudev and Jesus and Saraswati and Durga and Kali and Lakshmi and Ganesh and Shiva and Brahma and all the other incarnations of Vishnu, the boar, the lion. I saw them all within him, and that gave me, so that I had that experience. Okay, this guy's for real, And so again, if you're a cynical person, you could say, that's a fantasy, that's a dream. To me, the level of bliss that accompanied that experience is the proof of its reality. It's the quality of the energy that you can differentiate between a real experience and a fantasy.
Well, there's a lot of people these days in contemporary spirituality who, they get the idea of non-duality, and maybe they even have some degree of experience of it. But all this other stuff, when you start talking about deities and avatars and boars and all this stuff, it seems like so much sort of fanciful falderall. There's just like kind of like all kinds of.
But it's fun. It's a joy.
Yeah, but they would perhaps say, I'm just speaking devil's advocate, that it can be a distraction. You can just get caught up in all this stuff. But I mean, I would just counter. Not that my experience is rich in this regard, but I would just counter that in my Father's house there are many mansions. That there actually are a wide range of realms of creation and all sorts of subtle realities.
That's right.
Which, you can take anything and boil it down to nothingness if you want to do that. But as long as we acknowledge that there is a universe, then within this universe there are, untold mysteries and dimensions and all this stuff. Yeah. And it's not necessarily a distraction or a trap to be cognizant of those. It can actually be icing on the cake. It can actually be a more full appreciation of God's creation.
That's right. Yeah. For me now, life is like a magical mystery tour. If I go out and I close my eyes and I touch a tree, I connect with the being of that tree, and it connects me with the whole earth, and I have phenomenal blessings from that tree. It's like amazing. Or if I think a mantra, I was talking to you guys earlier. If I think the Kali mantra, and I remember like years ago I was sort of reading about a lot of books about Sri Ramakrishna, who was a tremendous Kali devotee and all that, and I really sort of got this intuitive message that you're not ready for me, But lately, if I think the Kali mantra, I'm just consumed with her love, And even as I was telling you earlier, her current avatar, Ammaji, the hugging saint, has appeared to me, And hey,
When you think the Kali Mantra.
when I think the Kali Mantra. And so I'm like, you know, and the energy of it is extremely blissful. So, you know, I'd rather be enjoying life than suffering. So it's a joy. And exactly, and I think what you said is the critical thing. You know, you can take, and I see this within the oneness movement. You know, I do question and answers after my online oneness meditations, and some people, you know, ask these types of questions even in emails. I had this where, you know, they want to take that non-dual point of view, that that there's only the field of consciousness and all the rest of this is not real, and you know, and no one gets awakened, and there are
Because there's nobody to get
because there's
awakened.
nobody to get awakened and
Right.
all that. And I'm saying, you talk to anyone who's awakening, who's had an awakened experience, you know, and even the teachers who teach this, Adyashanti teaches that. He'll describe his awakening experience.
Sure.
You know, and Francis Lucille, a wonderful non-dual teacher that lives near us in San Diego, he teaches this.
Temecula.
And then you ask in Temecula, you ask him about this, and he'll tell you about his awakening experience. So, you know, the awakening happens. You know, so if you want to take that stance, then, you know, get out of your body. You know, go back into pure consciousness. If you're in a body, there's this reality, and just that was a beautiful way you expressed it. To me, you have to understand that yes, there's nothing but the field. Yes, there's nothing but the void. There's nothing but the pure divine energy, which has no attributes, no qualities, nothing. But somehow it has manifested this universe, maybe just to have fun.
Yeah.
Marsh used to say the whole purpose of it is the expansion of bliss, so that sooner or later every part of the manifestation comes back to its true nature of bliss, and appreciates the Creator, and joy is somehow expanded even though it can't expand. But so the Creator gets to enjoy. It's like if you write a book with a happy ending, you get to enjoy that. And
Well, you know, Marsha used to say the purpose of creation is the expansion of happiness.
yeah,
And think about that. I mean, the purpose of creation, the whole manifestation of the universe, is the expansion of happiness. Okay, whose happiness, and how is it expanding? And you know, why does sort of nothingness explode into somethingness, and you know, just hydrogen and helium eventually, you know, form stars, and those explode, and we get heavier elements, and we eventually get bodies, and those
Right.
bodies can start thinking about this stuff and actually begin to experience it. You know, it's this whole elaborate thing that apparently hasn't happened for nothing.
Yeah.
And that, you know, it's happened because now the divine can be a living, breathing, you know, eating, crapping reality.
right.
Instead of just, you know, unmanifest oneness.
Yeah.
And there seems to be some kind of expansion of happiness in that.
Right, yeah. I love that you said crapping, just because it always reminds me of this story of, again, the contrast. In the TM movement, we were always so, you know, take off your beads before you go to the bathroom, and there's all these sort of Vedic things, and, you know, don't go to the, you know, and everything was like impure. You have to be so careful of all these little different things. And there was this wonderful Kashmiri saint who was actually a good friend of Marsha, Lakshman Ju.
Yeah.
And I have some good, very dear, close friends who are still close friends, who were in the TM movement, and then they became close disciples of Lakshman Ju, and they still are devoted to publishing his work now. That's what they do.
Kashmir Shaivism.
Yeah, Kashmir Shaivism. You know, the main guy lives in L.A., John Hughes, and he has like some other people who were close friends helping him. And so one day, you know, they were going to go to the bathroom. They started taking off their beads, and Lakshman Ju goes, "Do you think God is not also in the bathroom?
Right.
You know, is there somewhere where God is not? You know, it's like, get over it." You know?
Yeah.
I love that story. So, so thank you for the crapping analogy.
Sure, anytime.
So yeah, you know, you've got a body, and like we were saying, you know, there may be nothing but the field, but here we are. So how did we get here? And you know, you gave a beautiful description. The field, for me, okay, I heard Marsha say this, and I experienced it one time. I was blessed with this experience that when I was in that pure transcendental state with no thought, nothing happening at all. In fact, Amma, the Amma of the Oneness Movement, gave that to me. She appeared to me and she said, "My son, would you like to be me?" And I said, yeah, that would be, yeah. And then she showed me her true nature. She took me into pure nothingness, the void. There was nothing except bliss, just joy and love, and even that you couldn't name it, And then in that state, as Maharishi said, consciousness became aware of itself. And that being aware of itself triggered the whole creation. I saw that being, like Krishna says, curving back on myself, I create again and again. So there was like it was not really happening, but somehow that awareness became aware of itself, and that became a golden sphere. And that golden sphere was the Divine Mother, the Divine Feminine, and she birthed this whole creation. She was like the seed, and out of her came Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, and they manifested through first light. Everything became gold, and then it took different colors, and then the colors interacted with each other, and the Om came out, and it got more and more complex. And then I started seeing the Hiranyagarbha, the golden egg of a creation, spinning like a golden egg, and then out of that sphere, the experience went back to that sphere, and it was like countless eggs were coming out, one after another, just countless universes manifesting. And so I think that's all that's happening is the void becomes aware of itself and wants to expand that nature of love and joy. Okay, this is great. Let's let Ricky have it too.
You mentioned, let's just take a diversion for a minute and talk about pulse diagnosis.
Okay.
Because you actually make your living doing that, and I've done that with you many times, and I think people might find it interesting. So, you mentioned that this ability somehow was gifted to you when you had an experience of Krishna many years ago.
That's right. Yeah.
And that was before the TM movement even talked about Ayurveda.
That's right.
But then Ayurveda came along. And
Yeah.
So let's give a demonstration of that. And we obviously don't want to have a lot of dead air, so we won't take 15 minutes for you to feel my pulse, but we could take a couple of minutes and whatever it takes, and you can talk about that, and it'd be interesting. So do you do it without touching my wrist?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I do most of my work by phone.
So you don't need
Skype.
to touch the person's
I don't
wrist
need
or
to
anything?
touch the person, yeah.
Okay.
Because it's all happening within consciousness, and so the physical touch doesn't. There's no distance. There's nothing like that happens.
Okay.
Let's see. Is your energy level good? You feel very energetic these days?
Pretty much.
No problem there?
Yep.
Like that? That's good, yeah.
I mean, my work tends to be a little mind-numbing. I'm sitting in front of a computer all day, and so I get some brain fatigue from that, which I'm always working on and resolving and dissolving. But I have a lot of energy. I'm kind of very ambitious and motivated, and physical energy as well. I mean, I love to hop on my bike and ride 20 miles and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just seeing a little, it's all right now, but I'm just seeing a little risk to your thyroid at some point.
Risk.
It's okay now, but there's a bit of inflammation in the thyroid. And and if you work too hard in your mind, that disturbs the vayus, and they start moving pitta up into your thyroid. And you also have to be very careful of your diet. If you get toxicity, like right now your spleen's a little bit inflamed. And because there's something a little toxic, something you ate or something, the air here in Fairfield can be pretty toxic with pesticides from the farms. So there's something a little toxic in your system, and your spleen has filtered it out. So your spleen's a little toxic right now, and it's radiating some toxicity in the lymphatic system. And for some reason, I was seeing both those two angles, just in that quick look, are causing some affliction of the thyroid. So I would feel, so if I were treating you, I would, maybe as a preventative to take a natural thyroid supplement, not one of the glandular ones.
Right.
But there are some very good ones out there that are mainly herbs and vitamins and enzymes, and they help the strengthen the thyroid.
So, so you not only, and obviously this was a really quick little thing. You usually go much more deeply into it and
Yeah, I
spend
do.
an hour with people
I
and
do,
stuff.
yeah.
But you not only sort of tell them things like that, but you actually recommend particular herbs.
I
and
recommend supplements and also dietary points, and I think like
So it's supposed to be real good.
yeah, oh yeah, they're stand. Yeah, those are good products. Yeah.
That one's okay.
Yeah, well, I'd have to check it. The way I prescribe things is just by the name, if I think the name and I look at the person, his thyroid would show me
Trophin,
how
PNG.
how it would respond. So let's just see. Yeah, that would do what's needed for you. I'm not saying it's the best. Usually I compare 3 or 4 products and his body would tell me which one it liked best. But this one does what's needed for him. It would be good.
Okay. Good. Yeah, I mean, Irene's mentioned my thyroid a number of times, thinking that maybe I've got something going
It's
on.
got
with it.
some of the symptoms.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think you hit it.
Yeah.
Just eyebrows.
Yeah, like I have very little eyebrows left. That's supposed to be a symptom of thyroid.
That's probably why I thought your head was getting bigger.
Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to give people a taste of that, just because it's an interesting thing that you do and have been doing for a long time, and that too could be brushed off as some kind of imaginary thing. But I've seen you, go into quite some detail, and it's different for every person. And so on.
Yeah.
You used to do it by feeling the wrist, and now you just do it.
Yeah.
And I mean, and you're not the first or only person to be able to do something like this. We knew this guy in
There's plenty
India,
out
right?
there, yeah.
Dr. Triguna.
Yeah, he was way beyond me. God, I mean,
he was remarkable.
Yeah, He just looked at you, and he knew everything about you.
Yeah.
And and he could even foresee the future, which he did a couple of times with me. And then he would take your pulse like this. He would just tap it, boom, like that.
Yeah,
and he once said, "I'm only doing that. I just look at you and I know everything, and I just tap you to bless you." So he touches you to bless you.
Yeah.
So he's my hero. He's like to me, he's like a god. He was like the most amazing Ayurvedic doctor of this generation.
Yeah. He just died a year or so ago. But
Yeah, aged 93,
something like that. Yeah. But it's again, I have a certain kind of reaction or not opposition, I don't know the word, to this sort of plain vanilla form of spirituality where people feel like it's all just nothingness, it's all just emptiness. And I always like to kind of point out that there are all these rich expressions and variations and abilities and whatnot, and that's not a problem, it's not a conflict. It's just a kind of look at Christ, for example. He was running around healing people and casting out devils and doing all this stuff. He wasn't just saying that it's all nothingness, nothing is real. There's no you to cast out devils from. He was casting them out, healing people and doing so. Spirituality in its full blossoming is a much more complete package than just the unmanifest.
Yeah, absolutely. Because what we were talking about before was, when I was talking about the health, the nadis. But how do you get from this pure feel? Okay, we all accept it. Okay, there's the void. It's there. There's nothing but the unity, the oneness, like that. But okay, here we are.
Right.
So how do you get from there to there? It doesn't just jump from one thing. It goes through many, many layers, which start out as very celestial and beautiful, and then and eventually get to this material earth.
Layers of manifestation.
Layers of manifestation. So as you evolve spiritually, you can start tapping into more and more of these deeper levels. You can be seeing gods, experiencing their blessings. You can be, having all kinds of magical, mystical experiences. And what are you going to say? Like Therese Newman, who's like sitting there, like bleeding the wounds of Christ, that it's not happening, it's all unreal. Hey, she's bleeding. She's experiencing the crucifixion. So.
Yeah.
I
mean, I think it can be a distraction for people if they're not capturing the forward, if there's not sort of the intention or orientation to establish the deepest level of awareness.
Right.
You can get hung up in all sorts of new age entertainments.
Right.
But once that deepest value of pure being is established, then a lot of this other stuff gets added onto thee.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or like Krishna says, know that by which all else is known. Or seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all else is added unto thee. One time Maharishi there was a statement which is very widely mistranslated and confused in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, where a lot of the translations talk about the siddhis or the supernormal powers as being obstacles to awakening.
Right.
And Maharishi said it's a mistranslation. He said they're subservient to awakening, not obstacles. So it's a misunderstanding, a mistranslation, which means they come out after you awaken.
Right.
Now, it's also true, and you see it. I've seen it. I live in California, and I see it all the time, where people develop an ability, or it's given to them, and they get lost in it, and they don't awaken.
Right.
There was this guy who was connected with a movement. I think he's been here a bunch of times, and he's pretty nasty behavior, and yet he's like a powerful healer. Some Indian guy, I can't remember his name. Probably shouldn't say the name.
I don't even know.
But he's been around the country, and he doesn't exhibit, shall we say, very noble behavioral patterns. At the same time, people get some powerful healings from him.
Yeah.
So those abilities can be there, but it's a matter of whether you get overly caught up in them, where you identify them as something that's you, and you identify them personally, and then you stay stuck in your idea of being a person. Whereas awakening is all about you're not a person anymore, and that's not a concept. When you live that reality, it's not like you go along and you say, I'm not a person, there's no more Eric, whatever. It's just, you're just experiencing. There's no inner dialogue. You don't get, things don't stick to you anymore. You're just in a process. You're just the divine talking and seeing. You don't experience that. It's just happening.
Sure.
Everything becomes like it's happening automatically. And so you're not torturing yourself with thought and analysis. You figure out what you need to do. You think things through and all that. But it's just thinking is happening. Like Bhagavan's teaching is, there's thinking but no thinker.
Yeah. And could this thing you said about you're not a person, could you put it this way? Could you say the range of your experience has expanded to incorporate the multiple dimensions or multiple realities, the most fundamental of which is you're the divine, you're pure being, which is not a person.
Yeah.
But it also incorporates your personhood.
That's
on
right.
a certain level, your person. If I pinch your arm, you feel that. It's not like the lamp feels it. There's a localization.
It may feel it.
And so you're kind of simultaneously localized and unbounded.
That's right.
Pinpoint awareness and comprehensive awareness.
Yeah. The difference is the kind of inner dialogue and the whole domination by the mind.
Right.
You're declutched from the mind. It's the mind that's spending this huge amounts of energy trying to define this Erichood of who this Eric is. And so someone insults this Eric, and so the mind is hurt because it's has this illusion that there's this being there. Whereas when that's gone, someone says something hurtful, and it's like it blows through you. Because, just to use that example, but some pain. It's life. Hey, this is the world. Painful things are going to happen, but it blows through you.
Well, maybe this is a good way.
There's no one that gets stuck on it, or no one's relating to it.
Yeah.
But it's automatic, it's automatic. It's not like
It's not a process that you have to.
I'm not identifying with my thought process.
Mm.
You know, I don't take credit. Some great thought comes up, you know, go to this place, be there at the right time, and you get there and you go, I don't know, you know, where did that thought come from? But it turned out to be exactly the right place at the right time, and some little miracle happens in your life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like that.
Well, this, I think you just gave us another clue for understanding what this declutching means, which is that if you are aware of yourself only as a person, as an isolated individual, then you can't help but be clutched. You know, you can't help but be attached, gripped, influenced, tossed about by every circumstance. But you know, if you know, and you use the wave ocean analogy, you're only the wave. Okay, then the wind can blow you apart, and other waves are crashing into you, and all this stuff. But if you kind of become aware of your oceanhood, then fine, my oceanhood contains my wavehood,
Yeah.
but that's just such a small aspect of
Yeah.
it that nothing can, you know,
Yeah.
nothing that can happen to the wave can actually
Right.
influence or
Yeah.
affect the ocean.
What I want to emphasize is the experiential aspect of that, as opposed to conceptual.
Well, we're
Because-
talking though, so
yeah.
you have to conceptualize.
Yeah, we have to
use
conceptualize.
concepts.
I know, but I just want to clarify that you don't be.
You don't just make a mood of that.
You're not going along with any thought of your oceanhood.
Right.
You just are that.
Yeah.
You are that without it. You know, you are your true nature, and then the thoughts, the waves come and go,
Mm-hmm.
and they go, and you don't take credit or ownership of anything.
Yeah.
You know.
And
And that's just an automatic experience. It's not like, okay, because that's what people get hung up on. It's like, okay, I'm an ocean.
yeah, they hear that and then they try to do it.
Try to do it.
Yeah.
you
It's
know?
not something you do.
Yeah, no, it has to
It's
be
something
given-
you are.
Something you
That
are.
is.
And you know, in oneness we say it has to be given to you by the divine, by the grace.
Mm-hmm.
The grace has to give that to you.
Hmm.
You know, whether it's happening to you through a meditation or a breathing exercise, you know, the divine could do it for you anyway.
Hmm.
And it has done it through all these kinds of things, you know. There's all kinds of bizarre ways people have gotten awakened, you know. But
Yeah. I interviewed one guy who was crossing a parking lot in Boston, and a car almost hit him and screeched to a stop, and the shock of that awakened him,
Yeah.
and he never slipped back.
Yeah, yeah, and then there's Harold Percival, who wrote Thinking in Destiny. He was walking across the street
In New York.
and the bus fumes, some bus gave him a blast of exhaust, and he awakened, you know,
Interesting.
and he wrote this incredible book, Thinking in Destiny, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, he awakened, he never went back. So it's just the trigger of what it takes, you know, that moment. Awakening was going to happen to that mind-body complex. That's all. Awakening happens.
But anyway, the point you're making is that what we're talking about here is totally experiential. It's not conceptual.
Yeah.
And we need concepts to talk about it, to write books about it,
Yeah.
but it's an experience that's being referred to, and so don't settle for the concepts.
Yeah, that's the key. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the key. The more you stay in the concept, you know, you're not going to awaken. You know, when you stay in concepts, that's the bondage.
And a lot of people do that, unfortunately. I mean, I don't know how much you run into it, but there's a tendency these days for people to, you know, listen to this stuff and read a few books and get the concept clear, because it's easy to intuit that, because that's the reality.
Yeah.
But then to assume that that's all they're talking about is this conceptual understanding of oneness.
Yeah. Well, you know, to me, you know, there's a plus and a minus to everything. I think I'm eternally grateful for everything Maharishi gave me and for the knowledge he gave me. And I think a lot of what he was gifting to people was the energy of his vibration when he was giving these long talks with his beautiful knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, you know, you can't control what's going to happen. And I think for many people, they got lost in the concepts. It's still, even though it's pure knowledge, it's still knowledge. It's something you have to go beyond to awaken. You stay. I think a lot of people okay, you know, I just don't want to start saying negative things about Maharishi or the movement, but I just feel that a lot of people have had such an incredible grounding in true knowledge that they can talk the talk and not walk the walk. That they're not living the teaching because they're in the conceptual framework. And I think that's something that needs desperately to happen in many of these movements where the phenomenal teachers gave phenomenal knowledge and techniques. I think, I live in the heart of SRF land in California, where SRF has major headquarters, and I'm finding that's true of a lot of the SRF people. Very powerful movements and phenomenal teachers, and and they're able to give beautiful talks, but they're not living the awakening.
Yeah.
It just really struck me when I got to India the first time. I walked into the first classroom, and the guides were there leading the first class, and it just was immediately apparent of how beautiful they were, and I just immediately said, these people are, walking the walk. They are living what they speak. They're talking from their experience, not from concepts they've learned from someone. You have to make that leap into your experience, and that happens, with awakening. So.
And again, there's just something potent about this whole Ama-Bhagavan thing that is triggering these awakenings, and that that's making it experiential for these people. There's just some phenomenon going on, some energy.
Yeah, we call it the oneness phenomenon.
Yeah, okay.
It's a phenomenon. Yeah,
Didn't even know you used that word.
Yeah, that's what we call it. It's the oneness phenomenon. It's just grace. It's just the
Grace,
divine.
the divine has created this channel through which grace can flow.
That's right, yeah. Just like the divine has created the channel of Amachi, Karuna Mai, and Mother Mira, and Anastasia, and they all have their missions, and who knows how many others. These days, again, I live in Southern California. There's a new amazing guru appearing, every week or two, and there's a healer and a mystic, at least 2 or 3 on every block, and it's an amazing time we live in. Because we're like Maharishi said, the golden age, the age of enlightenment is coming. There's nothing anybody can do to stop it. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. The divine has taken that intent. And so the divine is using many, many channels, because people are so different. It has to take some people, it's not, one channel's not going to be conducive for some people, and it is for others. So it's working through all these different means. That's another thing I love about Bhagavan. That's what he says. He doesn't say, we're the only way, this is the best way, or stop doing what you're doing and just do this, keep meditating, keep doing your program, keep doing your yoga, keep doing your breathing, whatever. Keep doing your kriyas, keep standing on your head, fine, just connect to the grace,
Well, I mean, if we look around us at the world, the universe, God is obviously not a one-trick pony. It's not.
That's right.
Not a fundamentalist.
Yeah.
And just every little iota of creation is bursting with creativity.
Yeah.
So it stands to reason that spirituality is going to dawn in multifarious expressions.
That's right. Yeah, it's just going to explode. Right now, I think this. I think it's happening. I think we're in a tsunami of awakening.
Yeah.
I don't know the numbers through oneness. I just know that they announce every month how many people are awakened in the world, and it's happening at around 4,000 a day now, all over the world, through whatever systems people are doing. And
I want to dwell just a little bit more on this. So you mentioned that awakening can be 1 to 100, enlightenment is at 70. I just want to dig into that a little bit more. And a person could awaken at 1, 2, 5, 10, 15. So, I mean, you mentioned in your talk the other night that a lot of people are coming from China now to the Oneness University because they don't have a lot of spirituality opportunities.
They have to put in a quota at Oneness University, otherwise it'd be all Chinese. There'd be no room for anybody else.
How many does the place accommodate?
Well, they have that Indian component of.
If there's a square inch of space, put a body there.
Yeah. So, biggest course so far has been about 1,200. But that's on 2 campuses. Only on 2 campuses. They have another 6 or 7 campuses, some of which are just for Indians. There's one campus which is like the original one, which is pretty rough, and the Russians take it over every month, and it's like filled with about 1,000 Russians, and it's like huts with thatched roofs and a fan, no screens, dirt floor,
mosquitoes,
and you have to go out to they have no, it's not a latrine, it's a real bathroom with a toilet, but it's outside, for your shower and your toilet and everything. There's no running water in your hut.
Well, at least it's not Siberia.
So yeah.
But in any case,
a lot of mango trees.
I'm kind of interested in this thing about people awakening at various stages of development.
Yeah.
So theoretically, you could have somebody who's a 60 let's say, who's not awakened by this.
That's right, yeah.
In contrast to somebody who's a 5 who is awakened.
That's right, yeah.
And so the 60 might be somebody who might stand out in society as a kind of a great leader, saint, or
business person, everything, whatever.
Dynamic, creative person, musician
whatever,
or something.
Yeah.
But and whereas the 5 who's awakened might be completely nondescript and not really making much of an impact.
Exactly, beautiful.
But
That's
they've
right.
got this sort of inner freedom.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
They're growing.
Yeah.
They're growing more rapidly than the 60. But the 60 is in the realm of God consciousness, according to Bhagavan.
Mm-hmm.
So if we accept again that I don't know that but
And
that's,
what is his? And we're not in a rush, but what is the roadmap of states of consciousness? Like,
he doesn't lay
Maharishi
it out
had a
like-
roadmap.
Yeah, he doesn't lay it out. I've spent time guessing,
Okay.
trying to merge
Trying to correlate.
Maharishi's roadmap, which I consider, like Maharishi did. Everything he did was like a system. Put a system
Right.
out there, and kind of one size fits all, and that has its pros and cons. But that was his mission. He knew his mission, and he knew what he wanted to gift. So he had cosmic consciousness,
God
and
consciousness, unity
God
consciousness,
consciousness,
Brahman
unity
consciousness.
consciousness, Brahman consciousness.
Right.
So as far as I've been able to speculate and talk with other people about, cosmic consciousness happens around 30, but again, even that, people are unique. It can be 30, 40.
Right.
God consciousness around the 50, 60.
And by the way, cosmic consciousness would mean pure consciousness established 24/7.
Yeah.
Along with waking, dreaming, and sleeping.
That's right.
God consciousness would mean pure consciousness still there, but refined perception.
Refined perception. You're experiencing on these realms we've been talking about, these more subtle realms of the creation.
So that's maybe
Everything-
around 60-ish.
That's right, 50, 60. And 70 is supposed to be unity, which is the only level that Bhagavan will accept as enlightenment.
Okay.
It's unity. And then Brahman, you're getting up to like 90.
90, 100. And the distinction between what is unity, what is Brahman? In this.
I haven't heard Bhagavan define that, so I would go back to Maharishi's definition of that. The distinguish, you may be aware of that already. The distinguishing is in fields of perception. Unity consciousness, whatever is my primary focus. If I'm looking at the camera, I experience the camera as myself. There's no separation. That's me. I am the camera. Like that. I am Ricky. I am the dog.
Is that your experience, by the way?
Yeah, woof woof. Yeah.
We got some food for you.
Yeah.
You're gonna love it.
No, I'm not at unity. No, no. So whereas Brahman is
Totality.
where the secondary, first the secondary and then the tertiary, it comes gradually. So first the secondary level of perception. So I'm looking at the camera, but I'm also aware Ricky is here, and I also experiencing Ricky as myself. Third level, there's a lamp in the corner, like that, or there's something outside the window, and so I experience that as myself. So Brahman is when every level of awareness is experienced as the self. So you're completely identified with Brahman, with the total unit, the total field, and every manifestation of it is seen, is experienced. It's not a concept. It's experienced as the totality that you are. So so the lamp is me, because everything is me. But who am I? I am just a field.
Right.
So you become completely identified with Brahman. So that's how Maharishi defined it.
Okay.
And I haven't heard Bhagavan go into any detail on that particular question, because not enough people are ready for it.
I get flack for talking about levels a lot, but I think this is just what we mean by levels, is that there are degrees of awakening. It's not an on-off black-white situation.
That's right.
There's a kind of a progressive, constant unfoldment.
Yes.
And whether there's ever any termination to that unfoldment, I don't know, but there seems to be
Maharishi said no.
no end to the degree of refinement.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't mean that the totality itself or the unmanifest itself that changes in any way or gets improved upon or more shiny or something. It just means that the instrument through which that is lived has infinite range of possibilities for
and enjoyment.
Yeah,
and enjoyment. You just don't. You don't. The key thing is not to suffer anymore, and not to inflict your suffering on anyone else and create problems. You know, if we're going to have an ideal world, everyone has to be ideal.
Is there much talk in the oneness movement of the concept of body as instrument through which this is lived? Is that a kind of an emphasis?
Yeah. It's not a huge emphasis, but it's like big emphasis in oneness is awakening. Is just awakening and then just declutch the mind and then grow. And we say like awakening is not a destination; it's a process.
It's kind of like a milestone in which
allows you to grow,
and
to stop suffering, allows you to stop suffering and to grow. From wherever you wake up, you start to really take off. You know, you start to, and that's a joy. You know, I mean, the feeling that you're growing is, is really a powerful joy.
So is there a lot of guidance and programs for people who have awakened by that definition of declutching? I mean, there must be a lot for the people who haven't to get them to that point. But when they've gotten to that point, then is there a whole program for those people?
The first one is coming this year, this November, December, and I'm going to that. You know, so it's the first. There's enough demand, and it's going to be a mob. Oh my God! I say they're expecting 1,500 people on the campus. It's going to be really crowded. But that's India. They do it.
Oh yeah.
They squeeze them in.
Ama's place gets like 20,000 sometimes.
Yeah.
It's just huge.
They have this meeting in the Oneness Temple every Sunday where they bring in all the most passionate devotees from each province. So they bus in one province at a time each Sunday, and they get a special powerful darshan and blessing from Bhagavan, and also the highest group of monks that are in like this ecstatic samadhi state all the time. And then the Westerners who were there on the course get to go too. So they put up like these barriers. They let the Westerners in, and they fence you off. And then they open the doors.
And the Indians mob in.
And like these 8,000 Indians in one room, plus the Westerners,
Yeah.
And it's tremendous, all in one room. It's the largest pillarless hall in Asia.
Wow.
This top floor of the Oneness Temple. And so they can get about 8,000 Indian style in there.
Ooh, it's a top floor. I hope it never collapses.
Yeah, it's beautifully built. It's built according to they say that it's an exact replica of a temple in Satyaloka, the highest heaven.
Interesting.
The temple of Vishnu. So the architecture is pretty amazing.
Huh.
It's built to support that.
Yeah. So
it has three floors.
like the Indian Express.
Yeah.
That had 5. So, is there anything we haven't covered that you feel is important?
I think we've emphasized everything. To me, I spent my whole life looking for awakening, and it's finally been given to me, and I just feel it's the most important priority in life, is to end your suffering and to start growing like crazy. That it's a joy to feel that you're changing, that you're evolving rapidly, that you're not stuck somewhere. That makes you really enjoy life. So wherever you awaken, start to enjoy. Get your awakening. Do what you have to do.
I think that's actually an interesting measure of evolution. The fact that evolution is taking place, you can tell because there's joy. There's kind of ongoing. You feel happy. Things are going well, and so on. Whereas if you're stuck, it's like nature's way of telling you you're not evolving.
That's right.
You've got to do something.
Yeah, and it's going back to the highest philosophical knowledge, which is going back to the void. None of this is real. Okay, it is all just the divine being aware of itself, and so it can't stay static because it's not real. So nothing can last. So the only thing that's permanent is awakening when you're identified with your true nature, and then everything else is just going on. Everything else is just processing, and you're growing and evolving, and you're not stuck. But when people are like trying to hold on to their money or their possessions, or they're trying to say, I just want to have security. It's not gonna, it's not gonna happen. You can't hold on to anything.
Yeah.
Everything is constantly shifting, and so when you can be in that flow, you enjoy life. But the minute you try to stop it, you're in trouble.
You're seeking security in that which is inherently insecure.
Yeah.
Something which changes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Cool. Alrighty. Well, this has given people a taste.
Yeah, that's been fun.
Yeah. Taste of the Eisen world.
Yeah.
Eric does these pulse diagnosis things. That's how he supports himself. He doesn't support himself through the oneness thing.
No,
right?
we don't take money.
We don't
for
take
any
money
of
for
these
that.
things, yeah.
So if that intrigues you, he has a website which I'll be linking to where you can find out all about that. But then of course there's the oneness thing. We've talked a lot about that, and you have a website where you do these oneness meditations online.
Yeah, it's not a website. It's
a
a live
stream thing.
account. Yeah.
Yeah. So people can actually participate in those if they wish, and you do
That's
questions
free.
and answers. And
Yeah, that's
it's
free.
also free. I've listened to some of those question and answer sessions. Those are nice. So I'll link on Eric's page on Batgap. I'll link to a number of things that he wants me to link to, so you can get in touch with him or find out more about all these things. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great to hang with you again.
Yeah.
Ricky and I have been through a few wars together.
Yeah.
Chicago, Detroit. Oh my God.
Fortunately, we were on the same army.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
we weren't at war with each other.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And Eric's put up with all kinds of, all kinds of things I've been through, with great patience.
And likewise.
Yeah, and likewise. we're all bozos on this bus.
That's right. Yeah.
So let me make my usual wrap-up points. I've been talking with my friend Eric Eisen, and this interview has been one in an ongoing series. There are 180 something of them now. You can find them all at batgap.com, BATGAP, where there's both an alphabetical and a chronological index of all the interviews. I'm also thinking of trying to figure out a way of, people have requested this. I'm always getting asked, well, what are your favorite ones? And I'm thinking of doing some kind of voting system where people can send in their votes for what their favorite ones are, and we'll keep tallying those and updating it. So there will be a page where you can see the top 20 as measured by the audience. So in any case, there at Batgap, you'll find all those other interviews. There's a discussion group that springs up around each interview. You can participate in that. There is a link to the audio podcast, because a lot of people don't like to just sit in front of their computer and watch things like this. They'll listen while they drive or whatever. There's a donate button, which I depend upon people clicking on now and then to support all the expenses involved in this.
He has some nice new equipment.
Yeah, I do. I have a camera here.
He has a mixer. And things like sound mixer. That's nice.
I actually got the mixer for free with Amazon credits.
Oh yeah, I do that too. I have their credit card.
Yeah, I link to people's books that they publish, you see. And so if you click on a book link in Batgap, like let's say you want to buy an airplane, click on a link in Batgap first. It'll take you to Amazon. Then I'll get an affiliate credit for that airplane.
Oh, that's great. Wow, that's really good.
And then I can get little things like this. So, okay, I think that just about covers it. One more little thing. There's a sign-up list there where you can be notified by email every time a new interview is posted. So feel free to sign up, and you'll just get one email a week or so when a new interview is posted. So thanks for listening or watching, and we'll see you next week. Next week for me is a few minutes from now, when I'm going to interview Michael James over in the UK. He's an expert on Ramana Maharshi and has written a 500-page book about him, which is really rich and full of wisdom. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, Ramana Maharshi is big in the oneness movement too. They quote him all the time. He's highly regarded. He's considered to be 95 on the scale to 100.
Cool. I'll leave that in the interview.
Okay.
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 Namaste, everybody.
Namaste.